A very good morning, friends. So I hope you're all doing safe as well as healthy. Well, I've been talking in terms of Ind AS 12 in a couple of videos, and our focus has been in the last 2-3 videos on the COP, not the certificate of practice, but on the concept of prudence as per Ind AS 12. Now we know that when we are required to create a DTA in the books of accounts, there has to be a reasonable certainty that future taxable income would arise. Now, this concept of prudence was based on a 3-step model, what we discussed in the previous 1 or 2 videos. And today in this particular video, my focus is on the concept when there is a carry forward of loss. Now, as far as the carry forward of loss is concerned, it indicates the company is already under a loss-making position, and whether it will be able to earn profits in the future or not. So whether the concept of prudence will be met or not, that is the concern. So I think the concept of prudence takes a little more importance when you are looking at this assessment in case of company which has got carry forward losses. So let's take an example to understand how we would make an evaluation of the COP in case there is a carry forward of loss. जो बच्चे नवंबर 22 की सीए फाइनल की तैयारी कर रहे हैं और मेरा उम्मीद है कि उनकी तैयारी बहुत अच्छी चल रही होगी, तो क्यों ना इस तैयारी के बेसिस पर थोड़ी सी एवेल्युएशन भी की जाए. आई थिंक प्रिपरेशन एंड टेस्ट इज अ पार्ट ऑफ द सेम स्ट्रेटजी. चीज़ें साथ साथ आपकी तैयार होती जाए और साथ साथ उसकी आपकी टेस्टिंग होती जाए, तो उससे बढ़िया क्या है. तो अनअकैडमी पर आपके लिए एक ब्रेन टीजर फ्री रिवीजन टेस्ट सीरीज आ रही है, जिसके अंदर सीए फाइनल ग्रुप 1 के सभी सब्जेक्ट्स के लिए आप ये टेस्ट सीरीज ले सकते हैं. फाइनेंशियल रिपोर्टिंग की 13 जुलाई को 6 PM ये टेस्ट कंडक्ट होगा. ऐसी 14th, 15th और 16 जुलाई को 6 बजे अलग अलग पेपर्स के आपके टेस्ट होंगे. और ये टेस्ट सीरीज आप जो देंगे 3 घंटे का आपका एक टेस्ट होगा 180 मिनट्स का, जो कि एक सब्जेक्टिव क्वेश्चन पेपर होगा और आपको इसके मॉडल आंसर्स भी शेयर किए जाएंगे. और इसके अंदर हर एक लकी विनर को हर टेस्ट के अंदर 500 का एक गिफ्ट वाउचर जीतने का चांस भी रहेगा. इस टेस्ट को देने के लिए आपको लिंक डिस्क्रिप्शन बॉक्स में मिलेगा. अगर आप अनअकैडमी प्लेटफॉर्म पर नए हैं तो आप मेरा कोड इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं CAKB10 और इन टेस्ट सीरीज को आप फ्री में अनलॉक करके ये टेस्ट दे सकते हैं. तो भाई किस बात का इंतजार कर रहे हैं, आइए लेट्स क्रैक इट. Let's take an example to understand the concept of COP when there is a carry forward of losses in case of a company. The directors of H wish to recognize a material DTA in relation to 250 crores of unused trading losses which have accumulated on 31st March X1. H has got a budgeted profit of 80 crores for the year ended March X2. The directors have forecast that profits will grow 20% each year thereafter. However, the improvements in trading results may take place after the next couple of years to come at the position of break even. The market is currently depressed and the sales order are at a low level for the first quarter of X2 than they were for the same period in any of the previous years, and that is previous 5 years. H operates under a tax jurisdiction which allows for trading losses to be carried forward for a maximum of 2 years. Analyze whether a DTA can be recognized in the financial statements of X for the year ended 31st March X1 or not. Now, in this particular case, apparently if I were to do this question, I would do it in 2 different alternatives. Number 1. Let's first of all calculate what is the carrying amount of the asset or liability. Now, in this particular case, since we are talking in terms of losses is not an item of asset or liability, but it's an item of equity in the balance sheet. Now, if it is supposed to be an item of equity in the balance sheet, then I would say the carrying amount of the asset is supposed to be 0, because equity is not an asset, liability is not an equity. So we can say the carrying amount of the equity in this particular case, the carrying amount of the asset, I would say, is 0. But if you look at the tax base, I would say apparently the tax base is supposed to be 250 crores because 250 crores is what will be allowed as a future deduction against future taxable income. So when the company is going to earn a taxable income in the future, I will be able to get a future deduction of 250 crores. So on a very apparent level, I would say the carrying amount is 0. The tax base is supposed to be 250 crores, and this means that the carrying amount is less than the amount of tax base, resulting in a deductible temporary difference, which would mean that there is a need to recognize DTA. Now, in this particular alternative solution, we are not making an assessment of prudence in terms of calculating a tax base. We're accepting the fact that 250 crores will be allowed as a deduction against a future taxable income. But I think the second alternative seems to be a little more logical in nature. Now, what is the second alternative? When you're calculating the tax base itself, you should identify the deduction which you think you will get. Because if I'm looking at a tax base, I'm not certain whether 250 crores of income will be generated in the future and I will be able to get a deduction of 250 crores or not. Imagine in case of other items, when you're calculating a tax base, let's say for example for a PPE, the certain amount of deduction which you will get in the future, which is a depreciation. But here, in terms of carry forward of losses, we do not know with a certainty that whether we will earn an income of 250 or more than 250 or less than 250. So what will be the amount of future deduction is something which requires a judgment based on the facts and circumstance of the case. So the first alternative is that the amount of loss itself is called as a tax base, but I think that's not a very correct approach. In terms of carry forward of losses, I would say the tax base computation should itself take into account the concept of prudence. Now, if you go with the facts of what is stated in this question, though the management has got a budgeted profit of like 80 crores in the next year, and they are thinking that it will grow at 20% each year thereafter, but I think the actual result seems to be very discouraging in nature. It says that, that the company is currently having a depressed and a sales order. The first quarter sales is as low as compared to the last 5 years. And it says in this particular case, the carry forward of losses is going to take place only for the next 2 years. It seems very unlikely that the company is going to generate enough income that they will be able to get a deduction of 250 crores in the next years to come. So I think if you go with the facts and circumstances of the case, would the company be able to get a future deduction? And I would say no, it may not be able to get a future deduction. You are entitled to get a future deduction, but then if you look at the facts of the case, we may not be able to get a deduction. So this means what? This means that if I'm saying what is a tax base, the future deduction being 0, the tax base is nil. The carrying amount is nil, the tax base is nil. That means effectively there is no difference, neither taxable nor deductible. So we would not land up creating any DTA. Alternatively, let's say if you concentrate on the first solution and I say no, apparently the carrying amount is nil, the tax base is 250 crores, so there is a deductible temporary difference, and that would mean that we need to recognize a DTA. But on that deductible difference of 250 crores also, I'll not recognize a DTA for the reason there is no reasonable certainty that we will earn enough income in the future. So even in those cases, even if you identify a deductible differences, we will not create a DTA because the concept of prudence is missing. But I think the correct approach would be rather to apply the concept of prudence. Once you've calculated a deductible difference, it is appropriate in terms of carry forward of losses that the concept of prudence is applied at the time of calculating the tax base itself. So when you're looking at a future deduction, you should take the prudence into account whether and what amount of future deduction we'll be able to get. So this is how the evaluation of a prudence is done in terms of carry forward of losses. That's all in this particular video. Thank you for watching, and wait for some more interesting inputs coming on this very interesting standard Ind AS 12.